Have you ever stood so still that you could hear your own heart hammering against your ribs, terrified that even the sound of your breathing might cost you everything you love? Have you ever looked into the eyes of a man who holds the law in one hand and your destruction in the other, and realized that the only thing standing between your children and a life of misery is your own ability to not shatter into 1,000 pieces? That is where we begin. With a gloved hand slamming against wood, the smell of expensive cigar smoke in the freezing air, and a woman named Ruth Calloway realizing that running was no longer an option. If stories about resilience, survival, and the dark, quiet battles fought in the corners of the American frontier resonate with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are going to walk this road all the way to the end, and you won't want to miss where it leads. Like this video if you believe in fighting for what's yours, and let me know in the comments what's the one thing you would never, ever give up on. Now, let's step into the cold. The vibration traveled through the timber wall of the general store and rattled Ruth Calloway's spine. She didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. Beside her face, pressed flat against the rough wood, was a leather glove. It belonged to Arthur Calloway. He wasn't touching her. He was too smart for that. He was the kind of man who understood that the threat of violence was often more effective than the violence itself. He smelled of cold leather, tobacco, and the terrifying, sterile scent of absolute confidence. "You have until tomorrow morning," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low, reasonable rumble, the voice of a man explaining gravity to a child. "The children come with me, Ruth, or I take this to a territorial judge and you lose them in a courtroom. You lose them publicly. You lose them permanently. It's your choice. Make a smart one." Through the thin wall behind her, Ruth could hear the muffled sound of her life, her daughter Josie laughing at something, the rhythmic thump of Henry's small boots on the floorboards, the sounds of the children she had stolen away in the dead of night, the children she had driven through hell to protect. Arthur pulled his hand back. He adjusted his cuff. He looked at her not with hatred, but with a terrifying pity. Then he walked away, his boots crunching on the packed snow, leaving her pinned against the wall by nothing but the weight of his promise. To understand why Ruth was standing there, shaking with a rage she couldn't release, we have to go back. We have to go back 4 weeks, to a Tuesday in December of 1886, when a wagon rolled into Silver Creek, Montana. The first thing Ruth did when she pulled the exhausted horse to a halt wasn't to check the supplies or look for a hotel. She looked back at the wagon bench and she counted. It was a habit born of 8 months of fear. It wasn't affection, it was inventory. It was the frantic arithmetic of a woman guarding the only things that mattered. 1, Clara. 12 years old, eyes sharp as flint, already scanning the street for threats before the wheels had even stopped turning. 2, Josie. 8 years old, braids unraveling, chin lifted high, looking at this frozen end-of-the-world town like she planned to conquer it by dinner time. 3, Henry. Seal. A small fist clutched into Clara's coat, hiding his face from the wind and the world. 3. All three were there. Ruth exhaled a breath she felt like she'd been holding since she crossed the treacherous pass out of Helena. She climbed down. Her legs were stiff from the cold. She tied the horse to the post outside Harmon's general store and walked up the iced-over steps. She walked like she belonged there. That was the trick. You act like you have a plan, even when your plan is nothing more than "don't die today." The bell above the door jangled, a harsh sound in the quiet afternoon. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, dried apples, and pine resin. 6 people looked up. In small towns in December, strangers aren't guests, they are interruptions. Ruth walked straight to the counter. She didn't look at the floor. "I am looking for the town council," she said. Her voice was raspy from the dry air. "I understand Silver Creek needs a school teacher." The man behind the counter was Ed Harmon. He had a gray beard and eyes that had seen enough winters to know the difference between a tourist and a refugee. He looked at her. He looked at the 3 children filing in silently behind her. "Council meets Thursday," Ed said. "Today is Wednesday." "I know what day it is," Ruth said. "Who are you?" The voice came from the fabric section. It was sharp, distinct. the voice of a woman who didn't ask questions so much as she demanded answers. Ruth turned. Standing there was a woman with silver hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and gray eyes that were assessing Ruth's net worth, her moral character, and her likelihood of survival in a single glance. Dorothy Marsh. Ruth Calloway, Ruth said. 3 years teaching in Helena. 3 in St. Louis. I have references. She pulled a crumpled envelope from her coat and slammed it on the counter. I am running from a bad situation toward a better one. Your advertisement said no questions about prior employment. Dorothy didn't blink. We don't ask, she said. Doesn't mean we don't see. Her eyes flicked to the children. Husband dead, 8 months. You drove a wagon from Helena in December alone with 3 children. Yes. Why Silver Creek? Ruth held her gaze. Because you're the furthest place from Helena that has a schoolhouse. The silence that stretched out in that room was heavy. The stove ticked in the corner. The wind pressed against the glass. Dorothy Marsh was doing the math. A widow. 3 mouths to feed. A past she was running from. In the frontier, that was a liability. Those children fed? Dorothy asked suddenly. Ruth stiffened. They had breakfast. It's 3 in the afternoon. Ruth didn't answer. She couldn't. She had $17.40 to her name. She had been rationing bread for 4 days. She wasn't going to beg. She would starve before she begged. But Henry broke the standoff. He didn't speak. He just reached out a small, red-chapped hand and pointed at the glass jar of peppermint sticks on the counter. He looked at Ed Harmon with a solemn, desperate seriousness. Ed Harmon's face softened, just a fraction. He reached into the jar. He pulled out 3 peppermints and laid them on the wood. First ones are on the house for new folks, he grunted. Ruth's throat closed up. She handed the candy to her children. She couldn't say thank you because if she opened her mouth, she would sob. Sit down, Dorothy commanded. It wasn't an offer. Ed, get the bread left over from this morning. Mrs. Calloway, sit. You can't teach if you faint from hunger. And just like that, the door opened a crack. Ruth sat, while the children ate, Josie devouring hers, Clara eating with slow, disciplined bites, Henry clutching his peppermint like a talisman. Dorothy read the references. She read them like a judge reading a verdict. Says you're firm but fair, Dorothy noted. Says you had an altercation with a parent. A father thought arithmetic was unnecessary for a girl, Ruth said. I disagreed. Who won? The school board sided with me. The father pulled his daughter out. Ruth paused. She came back the next year, tested top of her class. Dorothy folded the paper. A tiny spark of approval lit her gray eyes. 2 weeks, she said. You get a 2-week trial. No questions about the past, but you answer to me about the classroom. The room above the feed store is empty. It's got a stove that draws poorly and a bed that's too narrow. Yow'll make do. I'll make do, Ruth said. I've been running this town a long time, Dorothy said, her voice lowering. I've seen people come through here hiding shameful things, and I've seen people protecting precious things. I can usually tell the difference. I'm not sure which one you are yet, Mrs. Calloway, but am willing to find out. The bell jangled again. A blast of cold air cut through the warmth. A man stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense. His face was weathered, his eyes dark and still. He carried himself with an economy of movement, like a man who didn't waste energy on things that didn't matter. Afternoon, Dot, he said. Will, Dorothy nodded. New teacher. Ruth Calloway. This is Will Hargrove. Runs the horse operation north of town. Will Hargrove looked at Ruth. He didn't smile, but he didn't glare. He just looked at her, then at the children, then back at her. It was a look of recognition. Mom, he said. Sir, Ruth replied. He bought a bag of nails, touched the brim of his hat, and walked out. He's on the council, Dorothy said. Good man. Fair, but don't expect him to talk much. Ruth didn't care about talking. She cared that for the first time in 8 months, she had a roof. The room above the feed store was exactly as promised, freezing and small. Ruth put the children on the cot and took the floor herself, wrapping up in her coat. That night she sat by the window watching the snow bury the tracks of their wagon. She held her document-pouched birth certificates, the marriage license, the papers that proved she existed. "Mama," Clara's voice came from the dark. "Are you scared?" Ruth looked at the snow. She thought about Arthur Calloway. She thought about his promise to take care of the children, which meant sending them to boarding schools and erasing her from their lives because she was unstable, because she was poor. "Yes," Ruth whispered, "I'm scared. But this is a different kind of scared, Clara. This is the scared of wanting something." "I want us to stay," Clara said. "Me too." The first week was a blur of survival. Ruth scrubbed the schoolhouse floor until her hands were raw. She taught 14 students who ranged from brilliant to bored. She learned that the stove did indeed draw poorly, filling the room with smoke if the wind hit it wrong. On Friday, Will Hargrove showed up. He didn't knock, he just walked in carrying a metal elbow joint and a toolbox. "Dorothy said the stove is smoking," he said. "It is," Ruth said. He knelt and went to work. He didn't make small talk. Ruth stood at the blackboard, practicing her handwriting. She wrote with her right hand, though she was naturally left-handed. "Why do you do that?" Will asked from the floor, not looking up. "Do what?" "Write with the wrong hand." Ruth paused. "Because a teacher writes so the children can see. If I use my left, my arm blocks the words. And because I wanted to be better than I was." Will stopped wrenching the bolt. He looked at her then. "Henry came by the stable yesterday." Ruth froze. "He didn't tell me. My man Lester let him brush one of the mares. The gray one. She's mean. Bites everyone." Will stood up, wiping grease on a rag. "She didn't bite him. He talked to her for an hour. Kids got away with animals. Just thought you should know where he is." He put his hat on and left. Ruth stared at the door. Henry, who hadn't spoken a full sentence to a stranger in a year, was talking to horses. Something in the tight knot of her chest began to loosen. But peace is a fragile thing. Arthur Calloway arrived on the Saturday stagecoach. Ruth saw him through the window of the Mercantile. He stepped onto the snowy street wearing a heavy wool coat that cost more than Ruth would earn in 5 years. He looked like what he was, a man who owned things, a man who owned the world. He walked straight to her. "Ruth," he said. "Arthur, you look tired." "I'm working, you're hiding." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded legal document. "The Territorial Court in Helena has scheduled a hearing. January 14th. You left the jurisdiction before the custody settlement was finalized. That looks like flight, Ruth. That looks like guilt." Ruth didn't take the paper. "I left because you told me I was unfit. I left because you were going to take them anyway." "I am going to take them," Arthur said calmly, "because I can provide for them. A school teacher in a shack above a feed store is not a life. Clara needs a finishing school. Henry needs a father figure, not a stable boy. Don't you talk about my son." "I am trying to be reasonable," Arthur said. "Surrender them now. Come back to Helena. We can avoid the court. We can avoid the shame." "No." Arthur sighed. "Have it your way. But know this, I am staying in town until the hearing. And I am going to make sure every person in this miserable hamlet knows exactly who you are." He walked away. Ruth stood there, the wind biting her face, and felt the terror rise up like bile. But beneath the terror, there was something new. Anger. Cold, hard anger. She went to Dorothy. She told her everything. The emotional abuse from her late husband. The way Arthur controlled the money. The threats. Dorothy listened, pinning a hem on a dress. When Ruth finished, Dorothy said, "You need a lawyer." "I can't afford a lawyer." "Then you need Will Hargrove." Ruth blinked. "The horse trainer?" "Will was a justice of the peace in Kansas for 6 years before he came here," Dorothy said. "He knows territorial law better than anyone, and he hates bullies." Ruth found Will in the stable. He was stitching a harness. Henry was there, sitting in the straw next to the gray mare, whispering to it. "He served me," Ruth said. Will didn't look up. "I heard. Dorothy says you know the law." "Some of it." Can he take them? Will set the harness down. He can try. He has money and status. Courts like money and status. They don't like widows who run away in the middle of the night. He looked at her. But possession is 9/10 of the law. You have them. They are safe. Are they happy? I think so. Then we fight. Why? Ruth asked. Why help me? You don't know me. Will looked at Henry, curled up next to the dangerous horse. Because your son tamed a mare that 3 grown men couldn't handle. Because you drove through a blizzard to get here. And because I once watched a judge take a child away from a good mother because of a technicality, and I swore I'd never watch it happen again. The next 4 weeks were a war of attrition. Arthur didn't attack physically, he attacked socially. He bought drinks for the men in the saloon. He spoke to the church elders. He planted seeds of doubt. Is she stable? Is she moral? Is she really fit to teach your children? Ruth felt the eyes on her. She saw the whispers stop when she entered a room, but she kept teaching. She kept her head high. Then, 3 days before the hearing, Clara came home with a black eye. Ruth dropped the ladle into the soup pot. Who? Peter Aldridge, Clara said, her voice shaking but her eyes dry. He said we were trash. He said his dad told him we were going to be thrown out of town. Did you hit him back? Yes. Good. Ruth grabbed a wet cloth. Does it hurt? Only my pride, Clara said. Mama, are we going to lose? Ruth looked at her 12-year-old daughter, who had already grown up too fast. No, we are going to tell the truth. And if the truth isn't enough, we will fight until it is. The morning of the hearing, the sky was the color of bruised iron. Ruth dressed the children in their best clothes. They looked small and fragile. They walked to the stagecoach stop. Arthur was there, waiting for his private carriage. He nodded to her, polite as an executioner. But then something happened. The door to the general store opened. Dorothy Marsh walked out, wearing her Sunday best. Then Will Hargrove. Then Ed Harmon. Then the Reverend. Then, shockingly, Nora Finch's sullen 16-year-old girl from the back of the classroom who Ruth had been privately tutoring in algebra. What is this? Ruth asked. We're coming, Dorothy said. Character witnesses. All of you? The school is closed today, Ed Harmon said. And I closed the store. Seems like this is more important business. Will stepped up to Ruth. You aren't walking into that courtroom alone. The ride to Helena was tense. But when they walked into the courthouse, it wasn't just a widow and 3 orphans. It was a phalanx. It was a community. The hearing was brutal. Arthur's lawyer painted Ruth as hysterical, irresponsible, and reckless. He cited her flight from Helena as proof of instability. He talked about the poverty of their living conditions. Then it was Will's turn. He didn't use fancy words. He didn't bluster. He simply laid out the facts. He spoke of the stovepipe. He spoke of the classroom. He spoke of the way the town had rallied. A child needs more than a trust fund, Will told the judge. A child needs to be known. In 4 weeks, Ruth Calloway has made herself the heart of Silver Creek. Her children aren't refugees, they are residents. To remove them would be an act of cruelty, not justice. The judge looked skeptical. He looked at Arthur's expensive suit, and then at Ruth's worn dress. Mr. Calloway, the judge said, you have petitioned that these children would be better off in your care. Do you still stand by that assertion? Arthur stood up. He looked at Ruth. He looked at the bruised cheek of Clara, who was glaring at him with a ferocity that matched her mother's. He looked at Henry, who was holding Will Hargrove's hand. Arthur Calloway was a hard man, but he wasn't a monster. He had spent a month watching. He had seen the way Ruth looked at her children. He had seen the way the town protected them. Your Honor, Arthur said quietly. The room went silent. My brother was a difficult man. I believed his letters. I believed his version of events. He paused. He looked at the map of Montana hanging on the courtroom wall. I have spent the last month in Silver Creek, Arthur continued. I have watched Mrs. Calloway teach. I have seen my niece and nephew. And I am forced to admit that I was wrong. Ruth stopped breathing. They are happy, Arthur said. They are loved. and they are exactly where they belong. I withdraw my petition." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Ruth didn't cheer. She simply collapsed into the chair, the strings that had been holding her upright finally cut. Will's hand was on her shoulder, heavy and warm. Dorothy was handing her a handkerchief. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp and clean. Arthur approached them one last time. He looked older, diminished. "I will set up a trust for their education," he said. "You won't have to worry about money." "Thank you," Ruth said. "He loved you in his own broken way," Arthur said. "No, Arthur," Ruth said softly. "He owned me. There is a difference. And now I own myself." The ride back to Silver Creek was quiet. The children fell asleep. The sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the snow. Will sat next to Ruth. Their hands were touching on the seat between them. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. "You really used to be a judge?" she asked softly. "A longitimiago, in another life. Why did you quit?" "Because I couldn't fix things. Today we fixed something." "Yes," Ruth said. "We did." As the stagecoach crested the final hill, the lights of Silver Creek flickered into view. It wasn't much. Just a cluster of wooden buildings against the vast, indifferent night. But there was smoke rising from the chimneys. There was light in the windows. Ruth Calloway looked at her children. 1, 2, all there, all safe. She looked at the man beside her and the town ahead of her. She wasn't running anymore. She was home. That is the story of Ruth Calloway. It's a reminder that sometimes the hardest distance to travel isn't the miles across the map, but the distance between fear and freedom. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories from the lost corners of history waiting to be told. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from. And if you think you could have survived a winter in 1886 Montana. Until next time, keep fighting for your ground.